Well, I can see from the chat window that I know many of you, and it's really nice to be here and to share the information that I have today that deals with broadband. You all know who I am, or most of you know who I am. If there's somebody on the call that's not familiar with me, I am currently a trainer working with the Center for Accessible Technology. From 2006 to 2009, I was with the AT Network. And before that, I was with the Assistive Technology Project at a regional center here in Los Angeles. And then off and on, I have done, I've served on different boards, including the Computer Access Center here in Los Angeles, which is now in PowerTech. And many of you also know that I sort of got into the field as a parent. So go to the next slide. In terms of some context of today's training, the Center for Accessible Technology has launched what is now known as the Accessible Technology Coalition. Accessible Technology Coalition is a national coalition to improve the quality of life for people with disabilities through information and training leading to successful adoption and use of accessible technology. Now those programs that the coalition is providing will include an online and in-person trainings like we're doing today, an online database of a series of articles working with a team of editors that cover a range of topics, an online Ask the Expert feature, much like you might see in some public libraries where you can online go ahead and ask a librarian a question and then they get back to you in a quick time in terms of some maybe specific information you're looking for. And then soon to be announced a website with customized user interface. And the framework of the Accessible Technology Coalition, at least as I understand it, is that it's really there designed to support not many of the AT professionals and the AT paraprofessionals that we're all familiar with that already pretty much are sort of well-versed in how to get the information that we use to serve the people that we serve. But the Accessible Technology Coalition is looking to support people like libraries, community-based organizations, where they're serving the public, but they might not have an in-house knowledge base that can really support and welcome people with disabilities. So that's the context of the coalition. Next slide. Okay, training goals. Today's training is really, many of you may not be learning new information per se, but hopefully what we're going to do is we're going to focus this whole area of broadband technology so that we can take a look at what it means for our community and why that's important for you as a professional working in the field of assistive technology. Because this will in fact be, if it's not already in your community, a major public policy issue and a quality of life issue. So the three goals that I have is to introduce broadband technology, two, to increase awareness of broadband access and opportunities for the disability community, and then three, to put a personal face on broadband and how it is reshaping the communities in which we live. Most people, when they hear the term broadband, they know that it's related to technology, they think that it's about the internet, but they're not quite sure exactly what people mean by broadband. I know that I fall into that category when I first was learning about broadband access. And so we're going to take a look at that. So hopefully the goal of the trainings will be to focus this as a sort of a resource for you in terms of your local communities. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, we're running way behind in time, so I'm not going to do the videos because that was going to add an extra step that I didn't know whether or not would work in terms of the audio, and I don't want to take that risk now, and we don't really have the time to do the series of videos. But FYI, the PowerPoint presentation is available through Canvas. And if you get the PowerPoint presentation, I encourage you to take a look at the videos. Because what I've done with the videos is I've tried to integrate actually the use of broadband in how we share this information locally in our communities. And part of what this presentation is also about is to try to engage local organizations throughout the state looking for collaboration and partnership. So as we go through this PowerPoint this morning, think about it in terms of how it might play locally with you in your communities. You might have a workshop. You might want an online training targeting directly your local community. And using the videos sort of adds an extra layer of sort of making a PowerPoint presentation, I think, a little bit more interesting. This particular video, I'll just sort of mention these as we go through in the slide. This particular video is a fun video that essentially is a kind of an interviewer on the street thing where people are asked, what is broadband? And what you wind up getting is this collection of people, all of whom have a very different idea of what it means when someone asks that question, what is broadband? And so it's a fun video. You should probably take a look at it, and you might even want to use it at some point in your own training. Next slide. Let me give you some context, and I wouldn't normally do this if we were talking to a group of end users, but this is something I think of interest for professionals working in the field. And in terms of the A-Team network, in terms of the work throughout the state, it is important to know about what other organizations are doing in your field, and also what money is in the state of California at any given point in time. It might affect you in terms of your own programming, in terms of your local ILC or whatever. So some of you know this already, but the context of today's training ultimately is part of what is known as the California Emerging Technology Fund. And this is just FYI stuff, not important to remember, but a nonprofit corporation, this is what CETF is, it's a nonprofit corporation created as part of the SBC, AT&T, and Verizon MCI mergers. Those organizations merged. When those organizations merged, at that level, the California Public Utilities Commission can negotiate kind of how that's going to happen before they approve it. Usually what happens is some money is set aside for some public good, and in this particular case, there was over $60 million set aside for CETF to be created and then to help close what's referred to as the digital divide by improving access to and adoption of broadband to underserved communities. The other thing that you would want to sort of just note about CETF is that when the federal stimulus money came out, that was all part of, CETF had already been in motion at that time, but when the Federal Investment Recovery Act was put into place, CETF in California was identified as the state coordinator to share information about broadband training and statewide services. So they got more resources, not so much for the foundation, but to reallocate. And so that's part of what's going on here. Next slide. And as part of that Reinvestment Act, there's a group that's known as the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program. You might see the acronym BTOP at different times. And in California, what that means today is that there have been 8 organizations funded through CETF, and those include the Center for Accessible Technology, Access Now in San Francisco, the Center to Promote Healthcare Access, the Chicana Latina Foundation, Dewey Square Group, which is sort of a public access, public relations firm, Latino Community Foundation, Radio Bilingue, and United Way of California 211. Not important for you to remember that, but just to know that there are organizations that are now funded to, in fact, do this broadband piece in California. Next slide. Okay, and the last slide in terms of context that I wanted to go over quickly was this notion of where was this money to be spent. And the money was targeted specifically for a priority focus on underserved communities. And those include rural communities that lack broadband access. And I know that many of you actually are serving those communities. Urban communities that lack the computers and affordable connections to the internet. And then specifically, and I think that's important to remember, specifically people with disabilities who lack technology accessibility have been identified. Now oftentimes when people talk about underserved communities, we often see that people with disabilities in the disability community is sort of at the end of a long sentence and sort of a, an asterisk, oh yes, people with disabilities. Well, in this particular, is there a question or comment? Okay, well, in this particular case, what has happened is that people with disabilities have been specifically identified, so that's a good thing for our communities. Next slide. Okay, to break up some of this stuff, I usually like to use little quotes. So here's a quote from the Consumer Insights to American Broadband Challenge, and it's a statistic worth noting, and it says, less than a third of people with disabilities, that's 24%, have adopted broadband by 2008. Now you'll see that statistic change depending upon the year, and adoption rates are going up, but that's a small number when you consider the general population at large. So people with disabilities are significantly behind in terms of having access and adoption to broadband, and we'll take a look at some of the reasons why. Next slide. Okay, so we are going to now sort of move away from the context. Sometimes the context stuff up front is a little bit boring, but I actually think it's very important. So that's the context. There's stuff going on in California. CETF is a major player. The Accessible Technology Coalition's been created. The Center for Accessible Technology Center in Berkeley is part of that. So that's the context. Now let's take a closer look at broadband. Next slide. Okay. And I'm not a techie, so I'm gonna sort of, bring, in the presentation today, sort of my general understanding of what broadband represents. And I think in terms of it, from a more technical point of view, you can be very technical about this, and I tend not to go that way. But broadband is a generic term, and it has different meanings depending upon the context and how it is used. Essentially, broadband, for our purposes in terms of the discussion, is nothing more complicated than fast internet access. It's generally 10 to 20 times faster than a dial-up modem. It allows for large amounts of information to be conveyed quickly, such as data, graphic files, or video. And when we take a look later on about some of the applications here, you'll see that you need that capacity for large amounts of data to do things like video and multimedia. Broadband is instant internet access 24 hours a day, so again, you're sort of always online. You're not having to dial up as in a dial-up modem situation. And broadband essentially is considered technology neutral. It's not considered good or bad. It is in fact how you use it that we're going to be considering today. So when people say broadband, it's making a reference to technology. But go to the next slide, and there's a quote that I think sort of helps focus all of us in terms of how we should think of it relative to our work. Next slide. Okay, here's a quote from the Media Alliance, the Digital Inclusion Toolkit. And there's a picture of a family here, a mother and a father and a daughter at a computer lab. And the quote reads, "The digital divide may be a problem of access to technology, but in the end, what matters most is not the technology, but the people who will use it." So, as we move forward in a society that is becoming clearly much more driven by technology, it's sometimes easy for us to stay in that technical place. And so this is the quote I think does a nice job of keeping us rooted in the idea that ultimately at the end of that discussion, it really depends upon how it affects and how it's being used by the people that we serve. Next slide. And this is a little bit more context, but it's specific to broadband, and it's another quote, but it's important because there is something called a National Broadband Plan. And the quote reads, "Like electricity a century ago, broadband is a foundation for economic growth, job creation, global competitiveness, and a better way of life. It is changing how we educate children, deliver health care, manage energy, ensure public safety, engage government, and access, organize, and disseminate knowledge." Now that has obviously significance to every single person in society, and it certainly includes people with disabilities. Next slide. And again, I'm not going to show the video, but if you get your hands on the PowerPoint, there's a video at this slide. And it's actually, if you're ever going to use it in training, it's a 5-minute video, so you wouldn't actually use it for 5 minutes. It would probably put people to sleep. But I've included it here because it's, I think, a good video clip of somebody that worked on the National Broadband Plan and does a good job at articulating how focused the government is right now on broadband as infrastructure, and infrastructure that touches on all of these other areas that that quote just referred to in terms of education, healthcare, employment. Oftentimes when you think about broadband, maybe your first contact with broadband is with an internet service provider, so it feels like it's a commercial engagement. AT&T, Verizon, you know, selling, you know, products online, and it's all of that, but it is definitely about these other areas of life that are going to affect each of us. And very much like a curb cut, there's a quote that's out there that talks about how broadband, you know, is like the electronic curb cut of the 21st century, and that if people have access to it, it will be very significant in terms of how they participate in their community. But if they don't, it will be like somebody trying to cross the street where there is no curb cut, and all of a sudden what they wind up being able to participate in becomes narrowly restricted. So this is a nice video clip that shows that. Next slide. Okay, so we looked a little bit about broadband. We know that broadband essentially for our discussion means just 24/7 high-speed internet connection. We know that the government's out there doing its infrastructure piece, and there's something called the National Broadband Plan. Now let's take a look at broadband and disability. Next slide. Oh, okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, great. I'll take it. Thank you. Okay, so there's a couple of things, and again, I'm talking to you guys as professionals, and so my goal in terms of you as an audience is to, again, focus the issues so that in your work into the future you can begin to sort of sort out how this falls into maybe a larger strategy. And when talking about broadband in terms of our community, it's really, I think, almost naive just to talk about the benefits without also talking about the barriers, because the barriers essentially represent the pieces that we have to look at strategically. Because if we don't look at those barriers, whatever benefits broadband promises is really sort of irrelevant unless we are honest about taking a look at those barriers. So in terms of barriers, there's essentially 4 areas that I'd like to look at. One is access, and that is literally, you know, can I afford it? Do I have the skills to get, you know, to the point where I'm comfortable enough to use it? And then that's the second point, digital literacy. If I've never used a computer before, or I don't have a computer, whether or not I can go to a website that has healthcare information, again, is irrelevant unless I know how to use a mouse or have some experience with a computer. Cost, obviously, is a big factor in that. Can I afford a computer? Can I afford to maintain a computer? Can I afford to upgrade the software? Can I afford the monthly fees? All huge issues that we have to consider. And then there's the relevance. You know, is broadband relevant to me? And with many of the people that we serve, you can't assume that necessarily they're going to feel that it's relevant. It may be relevant to you because you understand the benefits that it offers or is already providing you. But for many people, there's a perception that it might not be either necessary or relevant. So on this next slide, I have the title Unnecessary, Unavailable, Unaware, and Overwhelmed. And I'm going to read these, and I think that you're familiar with each and every single one of them. But again, this is about trying to stay focused on how all these pieces come together. Many view the internet as unnecessary and do not recognize the benefits associated with broadband. I did a training in Burbank a few weeks back, and most of the people that were in the training were people that were not using broadband. And when we sort of had a little bit of a group discussion about it, there was really sort of an unawareness about whether it would have any impact in terms of their life in a way that would motivate them to even consider it. The idea that it could affect healthcare or their education or their employment really wasn't on their radar screen. So that's something that we need to pay attention to in terms of public outreach and awareness to our community. Often access to sites that provide public internet access are inaccessible to people with disabilities. We all know that. So whether it's a local Boys and Girls Club that has a computer program, or it's your local public library, there's some real issues about access, whether it's physical access or sensory access or other areas that affect some of the people that would want to go ahead and participate in these programs. In 2007, there was a survey report that just 3 in 10 people with disabilities were aware of the available services. And so that's another thing. It's not just even having a perception that it might be valuable to you, but it's also the fact that out of 3 out of 10 people, so 30% of the people just simply were not aware that there were available services, probably weren't aware that there was the ILC in their local community, wasn't aware that there was the AT network, isn't aware that there's the Center for Accessible Technology. So our work in terms of public awareness certainly hasn't come to an end. And then the vast number of products often overwhelm many people with disabilities who are unfamiliar with available assistive technologies. So that's something I think that we're all familiar with as well, is that part of our job on a daily basis is to help reassure people that if you take a small step, you'll get to what you need or what your goal is. But if you just take a look at everything all at once, it's very easy to be overwhelmed. And I think more often than not, it can feel so daunting to people that they just literally stop looking. And so those are some significant barriers that we face when we talk about broadband access. And then on this slide, affordability, skills, and support. Affordability for people who live on fixed incomes, big issue. Lack of training in core computer competencies, big issue. At this training I was mentioning the other day, I asked a woman, said, "Oh yeah, I have a computer." And I said, "Oh great, well what do you use it for?" And she said, "Well, my sister actually has it. It's my computer, but my sister has it." And I said, "Well, how come your sister has it?" And she says, "Well, because I don't know how to use it." So it's that anxiety about having something that they're not familiar with and not having the training or the digital literacy skills, and so essentially it goes unused. Lack of support with ongoing use. You'll find with many of the people that we work with, the notion of having, maybe an introductory workshop is great, but having an ongoing support. Certainly true for seniors, where it's not just a quick fix. It's just not one course. It's about where do I get that ongoing use, and so that's an issue. Usability concerns including computer hardware and software costs and online content. So again, it's not just the startup cost, but it's the ongoing cost. Online security concerns. This is a big issue for many seniors. The fear that they are vulnerable online, and I think that that's shared by many people with disabilities. And then the unique and non-traditional living arrangements that many of the people in our community have, where they're maybe not in their own apartments or their homes. Maybe they're in a group home or setting, or they're in an assisted living facility, or whatever it might be. That can also impact their access to and their use of broadband technologies. So those are some of the barriers. Now let's try to see if we can make some connections to what those benefits are. So the list here essentially that you'll find reflected in most of the content that's out there in the National Broadband Plan essentially are healthcare, education, employment, civic engagement, public safety, entertainment, social networking, and media. So all of these are very, very important areas that we work in all the time. Broadband simply is a tool and is a delivery system essentially in terms of each of these areas that people need, whether there was a broadband or not. So let's take a look at healthcare. In 2007, more than 75% of all internet users had used the web to obtain medical or health information. So, and that number has probably increased. So the web is constantly used. It's a primary use of the web. You know, your doctor is prescribing you a medication, and you know you understand what the benefit is from reading the label. But people now are going online to check to see about side effects. They're going online to check and talk with other users who are already taking the medication. So they're generally, you know, seeking out information that they wouldn't have had otherwise on the internet. An important role in healthcare by enabling a range of telemedicine services that provide a number of life-enhancing and potentially life-saving benefits. I know that you've all seen reports, maybe on television or on the internet, about telemedicine. That's not a new concept, but it's definitely coming online, you know, and I mean online not just in terms of the internet, but in terms of people's daily lives. You know, you're going to see more and more and more of that for all sorts of reasons, and maybe one large reason is just cost efficiency. And so whether or not it's about, you know, your own selection of deciding that you want to take advantage of telemedicine, you'll actually begin to see that we as consumers have to begin to adapt to large health plans that will be using more and more of this. Some of those healthcare benefits include lower prescription drug bills for people to conveniently comparison shop online. Huge issue. I think oftentimes when people look at affordability issues of technology, they think, well, that's a cost that I don't need at this point and I can't afford at this point. But there are, in fact, cost savings associated with broadband access. And that would include, effective in-home diagnostic monitoring and treatment services. It allows for more real-time transmission of important health information. So it will hopefully minimize some of the paperwork confusion and bureaucratic frustration that many people in our community experience on a daily basis. And hopefully it will empower individuals to have more control over medical decisions. And I'm going to sort of take a quick look at an example of what that actually means in terms of our communities, in terms of empowerment. And this is actually the next three slides are essentially a scenario, what I call a broadband profile of how this actually plays out in the daily life of people with disabilities. So on one hand, we have a woman who has, in fact, in this case, cerebral palsy and is nonverbal. So for her to go to Kaiser Permanente or to go see her doctor is oftentimes you know, the quality of that care and the comfort of that interaction is oftentimes determined by how well the physician can or cannot communicate with someone who's nonverbal. So in this particular case, rather than go to the doctor's office and interact with a healthcare professional who may or may not be comfortable communicating with someone who's nonverbal, you now can have the opportunity to actually have interactions with your physician or your healthcare provider even prior to going for a visit, or maybe even in lieu of a visit. So here you have a woman who's, if you can imagine this, this is an internet communication between a woman who is nonverbal and her doctor. So the woman says, hey, my specialist thinks I got a kidney stone from a urinary tract infection. What I don't understand is how I could have that if I never had a urinary tract infection? That question alone, on an AAC device or on a communication board in a doctor's office in real time, is going to be discouraged for all sorts of reasons that don't even come to the surface, but probably would not allow this woman to have this kind of a conversation. The doctor types back in another email, never heard of that myself. It is possible to have a kidney infection and not know it. I don't have insight into this, but we'll do a little research. So these women, as it turns out the doctor happens to be a woman, these two women now are communicating about a healthcare issue that would not have been properly communicated in any stretch of the imagination at this step. So the woman responds, thanks. I'd be very interested in what you find out about the stone. I don't think I had a urinary tract infection. The ultrasound showed the stone in the kidney, not the urinary tract. From the doctor, and this is the doctor sending it on her Verizon wireless BlackBerry. Kidney is urinary tract. My recollection was at least one sample had infection cells. And then the last slide, the woman with the disability who's nonverbal. I did one with the nurse and the other one at the emergency room, but both cultures came back negative. It's a mystery. And then the doctor responds, so often stuff in medicine is a mystery. There's so much we don't know or understand. So this is the kind of quality of communication, a quality of life issue that literally we can look forward to seeing more and more for many people in our community who can take advantage of something like an internet access or a wireless BlackBerry communication with a physician. So there's a lot to look forward to in terms of healthcare, and it's something that we as professionals need to really sort of stay on top of so that we can start sharing that with people in the community. Education. In terms of education, I think we're all pretty much aware of how broadband is transforming education. We're doing it today. We're doing online training. This program that the Center for Accessible Technology and the Accessible Technology Coalition is involved in is going to be doing statewide work. And again, without broadband, we just simply wouldn't be able to do it. There was a nice video that we won't look at, but it is it's on education, and it's a piece that just profiles what it means to do online education in a home or residential environment. Benefits online education. They bring the classroom to you. With virtual classrooms, you can log in and complete coursework anytime and anywhere. Without barriers of accessing a traditional school environment, online instruction can offer an education that meets one's unique needs, learning styles, and goals. And you know that for many people in our community, just literally trying to coordinate transportation alone is a frustration and a barrier to education. And this at least offers an alternative to some of that. There's a video on this slide presentation that now takes a look at employment. And in terms of employment, you know, this is a woman that on this particular video tells her story as a young entrepreneur, and she is opening up a business, and she's actually involved in assistive technology. So that's a fun video to take a look at. The person with a disability working in our field using broadband access to create a business. Broadband allows more people with disabilities to telecommunicate from their homes, creating increased employment opportunities. An estimated 29% of Americans with disabilities would join the workforce if telecommuting were a viable option, and broadband will be a key to its success. Again, I don't think that's new information for you, but it's something to help focus the work. And then there's some really, direct examples of how, broadband impacts people in the workplace. Text-to-speech applications is a good example. It enables those who are blind or have low vision to read emails and Word documents. And the Internet Relay Chat and Video Relay services are helping deaf and hard of hearing adults to communicate with voice telephone users and coworkers. And there's a picture on the screen of a gentleman that's actually using the video relay service. And on the next slide, there's actually a really nice video that you can take a look at that profiles a young man in a work environment who is more successful doing by using video relay services. And again, that relies on this kind of high data, high speed, requirement that broadband provides. If you didn't have broadband hookup, you really couldn't do this. So that's employment. Civic engagement. There's a video here from the state of Arizona, of all places, but it's actually a good video, and it's a video that encourages people with disabilities to be involved in local politics and local elections and being registered to vote. You'll see more and more of the information that is provided will be through the internet. So if somebody is going to be an informed voter, or involved in a local proposition or a campaign of some sort, broadband will be where a lot of that information is coming from. So here there's a quote from the National Broadband Plan. Reads, "Broadband technology can only make a valuable contribution to our civic dialogue if everyone has access to it. As the internet increasingly becomes the standard platform for receiving information, those who do not have high-speed access to the internet will be left completely out of the civic dialogue." And that sounds pretty extreme, but I think it's not really an over-exaggeration. So this is, again, another reason why we need to be focused on this. Okay, I get a note here, moderator. You might want to ask if people have a question at this point. Make sure. Okay, well, does anyone have a question at this point? Thank you. I sort of lost on the time. Does anybody have a question or comment? Okay. Specifically, no, Steve, but I can look into that. It probably is on my desk somewhere. There is legislation that is, that is impacting the FCC, and CFILC may even be more specifically aware of some of that. Kim actually keeps me informed of some of it, but I'll look into that. I don't know enough of that, Steve, to be actually informed to tell you what bill it is or what proposition or I don't know, Kim, if you have any information on any of that. And the next question, Candace? Was there another question or comment? Okay, that's all right. But I'll look into that, Steve. It's on my list. Social networking. We're all, again, everything that I've said to this point affects everybody, including people with disabilities, and certainly social networking is no exception. If you're anywhere over 40 or as old as I am, which is, I'm now literally a senior, over 55. Younger people are much more skilled and comfortable with social networking than older folk, but that's changing as well. And it's something that is going to affect our professional work, because it's going to be how people are interacting with us as well. If you wind up at some point, using some of this in your training, this is a nice video clip here on social networking. It's a very simple articulation of what a social network is, and it sort of can help people understand that it's not just simply surfing the internet, but it's a much more sophisticated way in which people are staying connected to each other. There's also a video that follows that on communication. This is a video that I did with a local, a friend of mine in Burbank, whose folks live in India, and it was showing her how to use Skype so that she could, at no cost, at least in terms of the telephone call, she could have a video call with her parents in India, and I know that that's a big advantage for them because not only can they talk with their daughter, but they actually can see her, and they can be reassured that she's well and that she's being supported well in terms of her living arrangements. So that's all part of the social networking, whether you're using things like Skype, video calls, Facebook, MySpace, LinkedIn, you name it. I mean, there's so much out there right now, but it really does, in fact, create community, and that's important for all of us, but I think, again, it has this added significance for people with disabilities who, I don't know what it's like where you live, but I know in Los Angeles it can be very isolating to have a disability and live in a city like Los Angeles. So social networking certainly creates an opportunity where people are more connected. Yeah, they really are, and I've I've mentioned before, I'm not a techie personally, so I'm always a little bit behind the curve on some of this stuff, but video calls now are becoming a big part of my life. My mother has Alzheimer's. She lives in Ohio. She really, if I was to call her on the telephone, it's not enough for her anymore. It's a disembodied voice that she can't connect to, but if I have a video call with her, and she's 86, she can see me, and then that's enough to give her a foothold in terms of who I am just by looking at me, and we can actually have a conversation. And Skype is, if you're not using Skype yet, you really should be using Skype. It's pretty amazing. And then the last area that I'm almost finished here, the last area is the boomers, our aging population, big area that we all know in terms of our local communities and assistive technology. This is a wonderful clip of a 103-year-old woman in Australia. I encourage you to take a look at it. And she's using the internet, and she's her teacher is a younger woman at 86 who's reassuring her that the internet is not a scary place and that there's a lot that they can do and a lot of benefits to it. There are statistics that would suggest that there's a low adoption rate by seniors. There are 78 million boomers in America, making it the largest generation in history. The low broadband adoption rates stem largely from inadequate value propositions and our general lack of awareness of the benefits of broadband. So there's kind of this disconnect, really not quite sure what it is or how it might help. And so that's where we have to do a better job at public awareness. And then age-related changes in perceptual, cognitive, and psychomotor abilities pose a number of barriers to broadband adoption and use by many seniors. So there's some real challenges here. This is not to suggest that broadband adoption is going to be as simple as signing up with an ISP provider. If we're going to, in our communities, encourage the use of broadband so that people can be more actively involved in their communities, we have to seriously think about what these barriers are and work together as a network, as a community, to try to sort out where we're going to find these resources to support some of these, significant barriers. The Broadband Benefits for Seniors offers a wide range of life-enhancing social, economic, and health-related benefits. That would include staying in better touch with families and friends, work from home or start a small business, obtain relevant and timely health information, early intervention and preventative techniques, and decreased distance and transportation-related costs for physician and patient travel. You'll actually probably see, if it's not a Skype video call, you'll see something very similar to that, where people will be checking with their primary healthcare providers for non-emergency interactions by a video call, where the doctor will at least be able to see the individual and have a communication that is informative in terms of what issues are perhaps to be considered and whether somebody does need to come in for an in-person visit. And in summary, and thank you for hanging in there, you guys. In summary, these are just kind of, just a review. Broadband is a generic term for fast internet access. It's less than a third of people with disabilities have adapted broadband or adopted broadband. Broadband access poses significant barriers for people with disabilities. Broadband access offers significant benefits and opportunities with people with disabilities. And last, broadband represents a technological infrastructure that significantly impacts quality of life issues for everyone, including people with disabilities. Now, my last comment about that last note in the summary is that when people think about broadband today, it's not high necessarily on their high list of priorities if they're a person with a disability. Maybe their priority list is healthcare, is housing, is education, is employment, is community, interaction. And then they might think, well, and those are far more important to me than broadband and whether I can be on the internet or not. And I think what we want to consider, and that's really the essence of the presentation today, is helping people understand that broadband is a tool for all those other priorities. Broadband is not separate from healthcare or education or employment. And it's something to put on all of our radar screen in the short term and in the long term. On the screen right now, there are a couple of resources that I just wanted to mention. And again, they're in the PowerPoint if you get it from Candace. One of the best pieces I've read is a piece by Elizabeth Weil, and it's called A Giant Leap and a Big Deal, Delivering on the Promise of Equal Access to Broadband for People with Disabilities. It's a really good piece if you're looking to sort of start trying to sort out your own knowledge base and comfort level with broadband as a community issue. So that URL is up there and you can download it from that website. If you're interested in knowing more about the California Emerging Technology Fund, because they're the big player in the state of California, that URL is up there as well. And then the National Broadband Plan, I haven't read all of it. It's a very long document. It's like, probably 300 plus pages or whatever. But it's something that I encourage you to download because it is, in fact, a core document in terms of where the country is going with broadband as an infrastructure. And is not something that was written by AT&T or Verizon, but is really about national, public policy. In the PowerPoint as well is you'll see a list of all the videos that I mentioned with the URLs. Most of them are from YouTube, and I think you'll get a kick out of some of them. You might even want to use some of them in terms of some of your own training materials. And then in terms of contact information, on the screen right now, the Center for Accessible Technology, they're in Berkeley, and their phone number is 510-841-3224, and their URL is www.cforat.org. And they're the lead in terms of the Accessible Technology Coalition. My information is on the screen and my email there. And I am certainly welcome to anyone contacting me directly. There's both a local phone number here in Southern California, and messages can be left on office number up in Berkeley. And then Karen Sheehan, who many of you know from the Alliance for Technology Access, is the Director of Marketing for the Accessible Technology Coalition, and Karen's contact information is on the screen as well. Her phone number is 707-328-6384, and her number at the Center for Accessible Technology is 510-841-3224, and that's extension 214. And her email is kshehan@c4at.org. So that pretty much is the end of the presentation. I really appreciate you guys hanging on for the 10 minutes or so. On the screen at the moment is a graphic of a gentleman that's tipping over an inaccessible curb that is not cut, almost falling out of his wheelchair, and there's a logo that says Broadband Access for All. Without access, we're right back on the curb without a cut. So we really want to promote the value of using technology so that we can enhance and improve the quality of life of the people that we serve. And this is something that, if it's not already on your radar screen, it should be something to consider and think about in terms of your programming in the year ahead. And last, I will say that I am here for you, so that if, in fact, in your local communities, you would like to either have me do this presentation or something similar, and that could be in person, that could be online. That is going to be my job for the next year with the Center for Accessible Technology, to share this information statewide. And I encourage, I welcome, and I would love to collaborate with each and every one of you. So if that's the case, you know where to find me. I wanted to thank Candace for all your support, Candace, in terms of getting the training together today. And if anybody has any questions, I can stay on and I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much. Yes. Yes, my local office number is 626-796-1402. And what Candace just put up on the screen, the URL for the survey that you can get at SurveyMonkey there. And I really would love to sort of encourage you to give me feedback. This is the first time I've given this particular training online, and would like to know anything that you could share to make it even a better presentation. Thank you so much.